Welcome back to the Trampled Underfoot podcast show. Your hosts Mark Lindsay and Eloy Escajedo, and we're live. What's going on?
Oh man, just everything, anything, and all the things. You know, went out of town on Saturday. Linda did her first solo parade and then did a short concert solo. The rest of the band was otherwise occupied, but she was free, so went and did that. And she had a weaving demonstration to do and the whole shebang. So we spent all day Saturday up there in the heat, outdoors, away from air conditioning, which just made me appreciate air conditioning that much more. It wasn't as bad as it's been, but it was still hot.
It's been hot. It's been hot all around.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
big time.
we sound like those old guys you would see like sitting at park benches or like playing cards or something like that. Man, it's hot, and like they'd sit there and talk like for like a half hour. You know how hot it is? How hot is it, Earl? Well, it's hot, and then they keep going.
It's so hot. I saw a bird using an oven mitt to hold its worm. That kind of thing. So, but I can't speak for you, but I can safely say that I am one of those old guys. I just don't have a park bench close by, and I'm
we're
not
we're,
driving
we're
to the park bench.
Yeah, but we're all so we're all kind of like time suspension. If you think of your station in life at a given moment,
Hmm.
um, there's a certain time when you figure, well, it's all the same now, isn't it?
Hmm.
And prior to that, you're thinking, oh, that's those people over there. That has nothing to do with right. Isn't there a delineation?
Yeah, because it seems like last week I couldn't wait till I turned 21, and then I think about it and go, no, it wasn't last week I turned 21. Last week I was talking to my wife about whether or not I should take Social Security on my 62nd birthday, coming up in March. So it's like, where the hell did those 40 years go?
Yeah, I mean, it's just an amazing concept, like the whole thing. I wanted to share something. I know you have something to share, but I wanted to share something. It has its usefulness.
Okay.
I've been posting a lot of videos lately, history videos and whatnot. Well, a
Yeah.
couple of history videos and a couple of research videos. And I don't know if you've gotten
Yes.
around to seeing any of them or not, but they're I believe some of them are important in terms of that they're not known, right?
Hmm.
They're not known by the vast majority of people. But
Right.
I've now, and it's all part of my journey of exploring and grabbing information and adding it, and then I'm also, it's kind of like at the same time one is learning, one is posting what one is learning and stuff, and I've added notes and all that, and I'm doing it that way, and it actually helps me, and I think that maybe some people, the right people, will find curious and interesting, will arrive at it if need be.
Yeah.
um so one of the things that I've gotten into now is, and I'm going to post it, well, I'm working on it. It's two figures of the American Civil War,
Uh-huh.
and both of them were Cuban.
Hmm.
One was from the South
Hmm.
in the Confederate Army,
Yeah.
which is the one I'm working on now, and the other one was a Union. Both of them colonels.
Now,
Or
is this related to the one that you posted before? The one that you've already posted, the Union Colonel?
the Union Lieutenant Colonel.
Hmm.
It's related in terms of the era and the
Okay.
war
Okay.
and the nationality.
Okay. So okay. Well, I phrased that wrong. What I meant to say was the Union Lieutenant Colonel video you just posted, was that one of them? Is what
That
I
was
meant to say.
that was one of them.
Okay.
And now I'm doing to balance,
Hmm.
because it was a big war.
Yeah. Well, of course. Yeah.
Um, And up until now, like everything else, my understanding of it has been surface. I mean, we spent our lives um, either reading a book to one extent or the other, documentaries galore,
Hmm.
what do you call it? Dramatic recreations
Hmm.
throughout our lives and stuff. And one thing is to obviously, I'm not like a what do you call it? Uh, I've,
Historian.
I've never been right. I've never been one to specifically engage with these things. So I had the general sense of it with key points, right? Like a
Right.
normal. So like this happened back then and stuff, but now since I've delved in, I'm peering into a lot of little nuggets of history that's American history,
Uh-huh.
but there's a lot of connections to Cuba to the point where it's very connected.
Yeah.
Um, so, but like very connected in terms of like um, political, strategic, family wise, family ties and stuff. Um, Americans going to the island, marrying on the island, some of them returning to the Americas, stationing themselves in places like Kansas, Arkansas,
Hmm.
Ohio, Iowa, like everywhere.
Yeah, as
So
far away from Cuba as you can get and still be in the same hemisphere, basically.
yeah, and so I've learned. So before it was a blur of so like the idea of well, how come I get these British results and stuff, and a lot of people get that too. Like American people across the country, they'll post their things and well, how the heck do I have Iberian Peninsula in my thing and stuff, or how the heck do I got this or that, be it French or this or that, when they have no freaking knowledge
Hmm.
of how that could even be,
Yeah.
and it's because the 1800s and the 1700s was a wild time. I mean,
Yeah.
wild. But anyways, to conclude, I'm doing the Confederate gentleman now, and it's insane. These people petitioned the South when the Revolutionary War was yet revolutionary when the Civil War was yet to be.
Hmm.
There was stirrings, um, political ones and social ones, where certain Cuban people went and petitioned Southern politicians because of the wanting to expand what do you call the slavery
Hmm.
across the South and beyond. They wanted to continue that,
Hmm.
and certain Cubans were quite willing to get a helping hand from them by annexing Cuba to the United States,
Uh-huh.
like they had done with Texas. So they saw Texas that it was acquired, and they figured, well, hell, because Cuba wanted to throw off not all Cubans by any
Hmm.
stretch of the imagine, like in any scenario, they wanted to throw off the Spanish from their backs
Hmm.
because they wanted to be, as an example of the Revolutionary War, which was a big deal. The
Hmm.
American Revolutionary War was a bigger deal than I had. It was always a big deal, but as you start studying, things get really wild because you start seeing actual people's lives and what that means in terms of the unfolding of time and circumstance and stuff. So, but the Civil War had not yet happened, and there were people petitioning to try to get these Southern uh, politicians to acquire Cuba, and there was support for them. And so in the United States, there was great support for them with the Southern because they saw it as an opportunity to station more of what their world was, which was the use of slavery for plantations and so on, in order to grow their power. So they saw it as a possibility, but their main people thought on it and said no, including Jefferson Davis, I think it was, or
Hmm. Jefferson Davis was the honcho of the Confederacy. Yeah.
yeah. So he was tapped with the idea, but he said, no, and so was Robert E. Lee. But at the time, Robert E. Lee was um, not general yet. It was
Right.
either colonel. He was something else or major or something at the time. But they were still important people even then,
Mhm.
right? Well, actually, Davis was either vice president or council of war or something like that. I have all the information. In any event, there was that conversation, but so the dude was part of all that, and so there were troops from the United States that invaded Cuba multiple times,
Mhm.
not under the banner of the United States, under the idea of manifest destiny and the
Wow.
and the growing of the country, um, with
See,
support. What?
see now when you say manifest destiny, the first my initial reaction is to think the westward expansion.
Uh-huh.
The thought of expanding to the south never occurred to me.
Yeah, that well, me neither. But it was part of that concept, and they were totally pro expanding that.
I, I,
Um,
I have no, I don't know why this is, Eloy, and you and I have talked about this before when we were talking about the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812 and about Spain's involvement in helping us both times and why that is left out. Why is expansion southward never discussed? I'm 61 years old. I have never heard this before. Why am I just hearing about this now? This should be taught as it's a part of history.
it's a huge part of American history.
Hmm.
In fact, there was a battalion, again,
Hmm.
not authorized because the president at the time, Zachary something or other,
Zachary Taylor.
Zachary Taylor, was anti, although he was a slave owner. Because back then, I mean, there's another thing
Yeah.
about context of the times. Um, he did not like or want the expansion ideology of manifest destiny. He was against it. He thought
Okay.
that it was more of a hindrance to the safety of the United States as opposed to a benefit. But many Americans of import
Hmm.
were not in agreement with him at all.
Yeah, I know that.
Um,
I know that that was a major controversy even at the time. Manifest Destiny was not embraced or accepted by the population at large at all.
well, it was kind of
Yeah, it
a
was.
lot of people yes and a lot of people no.
Well,
It
but
wasn't.
what I mean by that is the majority of the population. It was a very controversial
It was
matter.
controversial. Let's just
Yeah.
say that it was controversial because it also flies against certain tenets of our founding documents.
Yeah. Well,
Important tenets.
there are also certain practical matters too. I mean, we had just fought a revolutionary war, war for independence, and let's see, Zachary Taylor, I believe, the War of 1812. So maybe not. I
No,
maybe
yeah,
it.
they were part of the. I think it was 1812 and the Mexican American War. There were
Okay,
various wars after the British, and it
right,
was all due to
right.
expansion.
Now you start talking about manifest destiny and wanting to basically take Cuba away from the Spanish. Now you're fighting another huge power, and it's just like, you know, people get battle weary fast, and it's like, no, we've had enough. So I mean, there's a practical side to this as well. So when you start moving westward, a lot of people weren't too keen on it, but we weren't fighting we weren't fighting another country, you know. Instead of going to war with France, we negotiated the Louisiana Purchase. You know, we went to war with Mexico, yes, but we weren't going to war with another country when the Mexican American War was over. and people were battle weary. I mean, figure from 1776 till when was the Mexican American War? 1830, 34, 35, something like that,
I don't know. I'd have
somewhere
to
in
look.
that neighborhood. So you're talking about a period of 60 years of almost perpetual war. It's like, holy cow.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
nonstop.
Mm-hmm.
So,
So there's a
so,
practical side, is what I was getting at.
oh no, well, no, yeah, there's people. So, just to wrap up the thing, many times the Americans,
Mm-hmm.
in connection with a certain general, um, from Latin America. He wasn't even Cuban. He was a, a general in the Spanish, a colonel, lieutenant colonel, and moved up to general in the Spanish army that
Uh-huh.
had served the Spanish army well. Um, changed his idea about that when he was stationed in Cuba. He was Venezuelan,
Uh-huh.
and he was of Basque parentage,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, he changed his mind when he lost his position
Uh-huh.
in the government, and became anti-Spanish, although he himself was Spanish. We're talking politically speaking.
Sure.
Same story. The same idea of the Revolutionary War in the United States was repeated across the West, the Americas,
Yeah.
because of the inspiration of
Yeah.
the United States.
Yeah.
So it was repeated everywhere and stuff. And Spain lost its grip little by little because of that. Plus distance, plus, you know, when Spain reached its peak at that time, it's when England was rising. England was England was not a power at the time. Throughout Spain's history,
Right.
Spain was the one that controlled virtually everything across Europe, across the Americas. But there was a moment shift, and that occurred, they say, strongly during the Spanish Armada,
Mm-hmm.
when they lost their fleet, and that occurred. Then England was able to, and then what happened, and we've arrived at this. But Spain was on the decline as time went on
Right.
through that era. So, and there was opportunity in the Americas when they saw the revolution
Right.
against the British for liberation of the Americas, and they saw, well, wait a second, they did that, we can do that too. And they had been here for centuries. You had people of Spanish descent
Mm-hmm.
with other, just American people, um,
Well, from the 1400s on, yeah.
right, that no longer had any, necessarily any. These people were far away, just like
Yeah.
England. Why should
Well,
England rule? You know what I'm saying? The United States. So it was those. But anyways, for the Civil War, this one general or this one gentleman had studied all his life in Europe and from Cuba, in Europe and in New York, and many of the people he studied with would end up in the Civil War, on both sides of the Civil War. And he himself, although Cuban, at an early age, no, not at an early age, I'm sorry, um, he became an American citizen, and he stationed himself in South Carolina. And when the war broke out, and there's more to it than that, but when the war broke out, he joined. And
mhm.
one of his uh, friends from school was a General Beauregard,
Yeah.
and he was from Louisiana. And so this gentleman he rose in the ranks as defense of the coast of the United States, the Carolinas and whatnot, Cuban gentleman, and he was under Beauregard, and he was there at the shelling of Fort uh, Sumter, the
Oh,
first.
really?
He was there that from the very start of the war,
Wow.
and he went on to become like a lieutenant colonel, or probably went up to general. I haven't finished my thing, but long story short, yeah, all these events cross pollinating with the surrounding area that America is, and so So yeah, I found it super interesting. And it's more
Well,
complicated than that. I'm making a video of it. It's pretty complicated but interesting. So
it's
uh,
always complicated. It
yeah,
really
give,
is.
give me 1 second,
But
half a second only.
okay, well, then what we'll do is we'll just sit here and relax, take a swig of the beverage, clear the mind, clear the throat. And that is something that Eloy and I have talked about before. And that is when we hear about, for instance, the Revolutionary War, all I've ever been taught was France helped America fight the British. And so the French came to our aid to fight the British. And without them, we wouldn't have won the Revolutionary War. I'm not going to argue that point at all because I think it's a fact. But what was omitted from that was the fact that Spain helped as well. Spain went to war, had our back. They went to war with the British and helped us fight in America on US soil.
Hmm.
And I was never taught that. I have never heard that even mentioned
Me neither.
in the context of the Revolutionary War.
Yeah, me neither.
I have never heard of the Cuban lieutenant colonel that you talked about in your earlier video that's already posted on your YouTube channel.
Yeah.
I'd never heard that story. I didn't even consider it. Why would I? And I've never heard this story about this gentleman that you're talking about now, that you're making the video on now. And I don't know why that is. Why was Spain and the people from Cuba, why were they basically written out of our history?
Well,
I
I
don't
think that
get it.
I think the problem is I think that that's extra. So like I think that that's digging in deeper. But if you were studying the history of the Civil War,
Mm-hmm.
you could stop at General Beauregard. And
Mm-hmm.
by the way, that general was a Creole,
Mm-hmm.
and he was a general. So, and this all ties into with other points that I've been also looking into, um, with Anglo-Saxon ideology and thought and religion,
Mm-hmm.
and then everybody else.
Right.
There's a dichotomy within that, which we've talked about behind the scenes due to
Right.
religion and strategic political and all this and that, and so in that there's many things. Bogart or Beauregard, I don't think he was Bogart. I can't say it's a French name.
Mm-hmm.
He was a Creole guy from that group. He was French, Italian, and then Welsh, British, with
Mm-hmm.
his grandparents. He was something like
Yeah.
that. And he was one of the most important figures
Yeah. I've
of
heard the
the
name.
of the Civil War. He was the first. And by the way, I'm studying this now because, like I said, I'm working on things and collecting, and I'm learning as I'm going, and I'm putting videos out because I think that that's a nice little way to work, and me learn at the same time and share it and stuff, with my points of interest right now. But the guy was was the one that shot the first shots that started the
Mm-hmm.
whole darn thing. At
Mm-hmm.
least militarily speaking, not
Right. The
politically.
first armed action. Yeah.
Right. So the guy was French, Italian, Welsh, and British. Don't quote me on the Welsh and British, but I know it was some sort of British
Mm-hmm.
on the one side and stuff. But he had all this. And this, and by the way, his statue back in 2015
Yeah.
uh, was demolished. I learned that as well. Like they tore the and people were cheering and stuff and yeah in the streets and stuff, and because they were Confederates, and so people in Louisiana, um, African Americans and whatnot, and others wanted the darn statue down. Now this guy's life, this gentleman, Creole gentleman of European background, but he was part of the Creole world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he wasn't treated really kindly in school. It's interesting to see. This is a European guy
Yeah.
of European ancestry, which is something we've touched on. But that's not even good enough. Not for the
No.
at the time the Anglo establishment at the time. They called him dark Frenchie or the black Frenchie.
Yeah.
And like there's all these things and stuff, and I read that, I was like, my goodness, it's you can't sever it. So he was, singled out a lot and stuff, but regardless of him being singled out, he had position of extreme importance over all of them and stuff. And there's a lot of historical notes. The point is this, that humans are pretty raunchy, and they can be pretty aggressive one towards the other depending on social status, and
Well, we can make it about anything we want to make it about. We can make it about blue eyes,
Mhm.
or you wear corduroy and I wear denim. I mean, it's just,
Exactly.
yeah, how, you're wearing white socks, I wear black socks. I mean, how wrong are you?
Yeah, yeah,
You know.
but to not but the idea is that even within this European world of, well, no, Europeans are the hierarchy, that was selective. There, at least there was the intention that it was
Mhm.
selectively for one specific European, and that ties in with the Spanish world as well. But at the same time, what I've noticed is that um, it depended,
Uh-huh.
with influence and power. It's kind of like today.
Yeah.
It's the same. What I'm finding is that we are kind of like back in the day
Well, it
to a certain
in
degree.
in many ways it's more subtle today, but in many other ways it's more overt,
No,
you
I'm saying,
know.
but let me say, I'm not saying, so what I'm trying to say, in my mind, I don't know how other people think. I used to think people back then, and I'm not sure this is 100% true. I used to think people back then were incredibly strict in
Mhm.
terms of, you know, oh, you people are, let's say, French, or you people are Spanish, or, well, we're not dealing with you. My daughter, that's not how it was. That's how it was in certain circumstances.
And in certain
But
places, yeah.
but in well, even within, so look, it depended. Like it
Mhm.
depends now.
Yeah.
If if there's a reason for profit or moving up the social ladder,
Mhm.
or if there's some sort of tie between family. So what I'm trying to say is that there was more mixing of people from different parts than we have previously even considered. I have previously even considered,
Right.
even though I've had the notion, but studying it, it's incredible. Anyways, this Beauregard guy, um, he once the war was lost, he became, for the benefit of Louisiana, he became pro helping African Americans in many ways.
Mhm.
Um, for his benefit of Louisiana, because he wanted Louisiana to. There was a taxation problem that was being levied. It was a horrible thing, and he was trying to get them to vote for their best interest, because it was for all Louisianans' best interest. But they had, I believe, voted in favor of of a different direction, and it created a lot of problems economically for. And so there was a lot of crap happening. But he did a lot of things, like he invented these trolley cars, electrical trolley cars, a specific in Louis. He did a lot of things for the. So it wasn't just once they lost.
Mhm.
He said, "Okay, we lost,
And
and
moved
now
on with life.
let's move on and stuff." And it wasn't like, so it's more dynamic than these guys
Well,
that were. Well, let me just say this one. It was more dynamic than these guys frothing and stuff. We gotta kill everybody and stuff. Although there had to have been that,
yeah.
but there was a little bit of everything,
It's
like
it's
there is
always it's
today.
always more complex. We
Yeah,
take a Okay, you and I have had this discussion many, many, many times. We have the privilege and the advantage. Now, forget privilege. We have the advantage of looking back on history
yeah,
with now a 21st century mindset,
Yeah.
and we have the also the advantage of looking at it with 2020 hindsight. We can see the mistakes that were made, but we weren't on the ground at the time.
Yeah.
So, you know, 50 years from now, people are going to look back on 2020 and 2021 and say, how stupid were they? Look at what they did when they had a pandemic,
Some of
you
us are
know?
saying it today as it's happening.
Right. But what I'm getting at, they won't be in our position. You
No.
know, we don't even have to go that far back to the Civil War. We can go back to the Gulf War and say
Yeah.
we should have done X, Y, and Z. Well, but we weren't there at the time. We can look back at that now and say, yes, this happened, that happened. We should have taken advantage and done this. But we know that now. They didn't know that then. So, there's a little bit of a, you know, things are always more complicated than they appear to be.
Yeah.
Now you start omitting facts and you start taking certain things away and you remove context from the issue, not to mention the, at that time, 19th century mindset and worldview. It's a completely different world, you
I,
know?
I will say this at this moment, although
Mhm.
I've said it before, but now slightly a little bit because we're learning as we go, just studying the things. And really, I'm studying what interests me in the context of that, but I'm fanning out a little bit this way and that way in order to see what the environment was.
Yeah.
You could keep hopping, like I could keep hopping on one historical guy and all of a sudden you end up somewhere else. But I'm trying to sort of like raking, like those mud barges that rake up crap
Oh,
from.
yeah. The dredges. Yeah.
So I'm opening up that dredge a little bit, not to just capture the person that I'm studying, but their surroundings, in order to get sort of like a little window. But even that is not sufficient for one to be able to say by any stretch of the imagination, well, listen, because now that is for these PhDs that even though one could snarl at, snicker at them, if they can encompass a whole era and know all its ins and outs, they could still be wrong about certain conclusions. But you can't say that these people that are well read and studied at that level, that, oh, well, that's bogus. These people have cast a wide net and consumed all this information. So it's easy for
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
to dismiss people that have put money down on it and gone through the process. But um what I was gonna say is that we've talked about it before, but the idea that circulates nowadays, at least with what I've looked at, looking at, but like looking at it, these are people with real names. These were human beings in the 1800s with real names, with real families. They were as real as you and I in the circumstances that they lived, and insane amounts of people died,
Hmm.
depending on which side or not, died in war against each other, and over over many reasons, but a main concept. And maybe a lot of them just did it because they lived in that side of the country or that neck of the woods, and
Hmm.
so this is my group of people and we're going to defend our thing. And some people did it on principle, and other people did it on all sorts of things, but they died doing it, and some
Hmm.
survived. And to throw all that out and like whatever, as we see some people do now in reference to calling the United States, or the assumption that it's a racist country, like that concept is, well, number one, that doesn't even, you can't say that about a country because a country is just a land jurisdiction. And if you're trying to say it about a country due to its politics, you can still not say it because or legally speaking, there's nothing there to single out. But what they can do, which they have done, is to create this by default systematic um, putting themselves in the brains of other people and doing all these weird things. This
You
is one of the
forget
big. This
you're
is one of the
forgetting
big.
a major portion of that, and also putting themselves in a supposedly morally superior position. That's a big part of it too. There's a moral superiority is a big thing to a lot of these people. But do go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, no, no. So that's part of it. So, but it's due to if it's a very hard thing to do. So if you sat down and read through the situations and then you came to your conclusions, you could still tell a person, well, your conclusions are wrong. But re, if they can reply to you back the history and not just little slogans,
Hmm.
then at least me, if they're being devious because they have an agenda or not, everybody's got certain agendas and certain this and certain that. I mean, there's all sorts of things. But if they've gone through the material and still want to think of it in terms of what they do and establish that, then I'm going to have to, I don't want to say respect it, but I'm going to have to, at some level, respect it,
Well,
even though it's not my conclusion. Maybe tomorrow, if I read through all the material, I end up in a place that's
well,
similar to, I doubt it, but
you may not respect it, but you may have to accept it because
yeah.
facts are facts, and that's all there is to it. And
Right.
fact has no agenda. The
Right.
truth has no agenda. It just is.
Yeah. So anyways, long story short, there was a lot of crazy things happening in the 1800s in America with
On many
politics
fronts.
and
Yeah.
stuff. Uh, I'm not delving into all of it. I'm delving into one aspect due to my genealogy interest. But as I've done so, I've gone and seen some incredible things that are like balloons. I don't know. Was that on the first video?
Yeah. Hydrogen balloons.
Yeah, just that whole world. Um, just a bunch of stuff, But
Yeah.
whatever. I just wanted to share that.
Well,
It's an interesting thing.
and it really is and it may sound boring to some folks. Oh my god, you're going through those dusty old moldy old pages and you're just reading about this, but these people, it really is an adventure for us to go back and look through the lives of these people. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
these were just regular folks that were living in extraordinary times, doing what they did for whatever reason, maybe personal, maybe political, maybe
all
they
of the
had
above.
ambition. I mean, maybe all of the above, maybe out of self-defense. Why did you join the Confederate Army? Well, they were going to burn my house down if I didn't.
Yeah,
Well,
but they didn't
there
think of
was a
it
lot
necessarily.
of that. But
And then there was no looking back at it. I'm sorry, I just want to say there was no at the moment, like you said earlier, there was no like, oh, we're on the bad side, guys.
yeah, well,
There was none of that.
nobody ever thinks they're on the wrong side.
No, even
Nobody
in yeah,
nobody thinks that they're on the wrong side. But
nobody does. Yeah,
so it but it's more complex than just saying A and B. No, no, no.
Mhm.
There's a big space between A and B. What's in that space?
Yeah,
Well, and also the fact that A and B are made up of individuals just like you and me who had lives. Some of them had families, some of them had homes,
yeah.
some of them were living in a shotgun shack, and maybe joining this military unit was the best living that they could make for themselves. At least they had, a tent that they could sleep in, and they weren't underneath somebody's wagon, hoping like heck that the farmer didn't shoot them in the morning when he come walking up to go milk the cow or what have you. You don't know about people's circumstance, and history is made up of these people. I mean, we talk about the westward expansion. You talk about the Great Migration of 1843 or something like that, and they say 1,000 wagons left Jefferson, Missouri. Well, each one of those wagons had a story because there was a person responsible for that wagon. There was a person's goods and family attached to that wagon. And they had a story. They had a reason for leaving Missouri and heading out west. And they did certain things along the way. They had a life before they left Missouri, and they had a life after they reached the Pacific coast, if they indeed did reach the Pacific coast. So it's all made up of individual people with individual stories. And as you go and discover these stories and discover these people, I think it's great that somebody is documenting them and getting the story out there. Because I don't know, for instance, I don't know how many views that video has on the on
Oh
this first one,
no,
but
nothing.
regardless of the number, I'm willing to bet you that none of those people ever heard that story either.
Right, they're there. I'm doing the videos for my personal growth and also sharing it because I have a YouTube channel. See how that works. But all these stories are documented. I'm just searching them out. The Library of Congress
Mm-hmm.
of our Library of Congress of the United States of America
Uh-huh.
has it all.
Right. But when was the
Our
last time you were there?
well, recently to yesterday because I've been working on it. But
Well, no,
um
I mean, when was the last time you physically went to the Library of Congress?
no,
I've never I've never been there.
I went to Washington D.C., but I was 13 years old,
Mm-hmm.
so I wanted to see the dinosaurs at the
Yeah.
museum.
Oh,
So
at the Smithsonian. Okay,
yeah,
yeah.
so I went to the Capitol. We stood up on the Capitol.
Mm-hmm.
My dad went with a shirt that says on the front Cuba and on the back, and it was red, white, and blue because those are the same colors
Uh,
of the Cuban flag and the American. By the way, the first time the Cuban flag was flown
mm-hmm.
in Cuba was by a Kentucky regiment
Really? Mm-mm.
under the command of a general from Venezuela, which is part of the story I'm working on now.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all pro liberation of Cuba, Kentucky people.
Mm-hmm.
And they went into battle. They took control of a city in Cuba, Cardenas, and they went for the capital. But the Spanish were way more powerful.
Oh yeah.
You're on their turf. And they had to hightail it on the sea with Spanish ships following them. And they reached Key West. When they got to Key West, they were all arrested because
Oh wow.
you can't attack a
A
foreign
foreign country.
country,
Yeah.
whatever. Anyways, my father went and I to the and my he had a shirt Cuba on the front and on the back will be free. This is 1980s
Mm-hmm.
and a hat to match it and stuff. So he was always pro that. The history between Cuba and the United States is so most people today have no freaking idea the amount of connections that marriage wise, population wise. Now, remember, Cuba is a population today of 11 million people.
Right.
Back then, way less.
Right.
Um,
Obviously, yeah.
in the context of people coming from Mexico or people coming from other Latin American countries, let's say, it's a drop in the bucket. But what it did have is that since it's a strategic island with sugar and just what it meant, it was very important for the South. It was very important for that manifest destiny. It was seen as a way to balance out the northern aggression, let's say.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so they were pro Cuba, and these families, some Americans just simply stayed over there,
Mm-hmm.
and they just blended into the population. So
Right.
that's why a lot of people find, and this is not specifically why the heck I have some British percentage. Um, I don't know that that's the case because I haven't found it, but I'm postulating ideas of where it could have happened. I think it could
Well,
have happened in the Canary Islands. I
well,
don't.
if you don't dig, you don't know.
But long story short, there is a connection. to that world, but even greater so to or not greater so, but as well towards Panama and other parts, because the American expansion had that idea.
Mhm.
Um, and It's a fascinating story. I had never really looked at it until recently, and it's still a little drop in the bucket. So
Yeah.
I'm not saying by any stretch of I'm
No,
studying a specific guy.
to
You
me,
know,
it's a fascinating exercise in that, and that's where I was going with talking about A and B are both made out of, groups of people who each have a story.
yeah,
Um, those stories will never be heard or told if somebody doesn't document it. And where I was going with the Library of Congress thing is, yeah, the Library of Congress has it all. And yes, you and I could go to the Library of Congress, but how many people are going to do that?
oh no,
If the
most people
story
might
is out there in the public, on YouTube or on the Internet Archive or something like that,
not.
there's
Yeah,
more of a chance that people are going to run across it. You know, you found this by doing research, and the first step of any kind of research is looking up a name or a place or whatever. So
yeah,
somebody with that same last name pop into Google search, let's look for that last name, and then boom, up comes your video, and there's something about a four times great grandfather that nobody ever heard about.
right,
We
yeah,
didn't know his story. So it's a massive undertaking that you're doing, man, and I salute you for it. I just wish I had the time to do something similar. I've been wanting to tell a couple of stories about my family too, and I just haven't been able to do it because I just don't have time. But
yeah,
I these stories need to be told, because if the stories aren't told, they're lost, and every story that's lost hurts us,
yeah,
because we can learn a lot from history, and without that history and without that historical test context, we don't learn a thing. We,
well,
in fact, we get dumber and dumber and dumber.
as I'm studying this, I make notes, and I'm gathering footnotes, and I copy the links and I add them to my notepad,
Sure.
in order to say this comes from here and that comes from there. So I'm doing it that way. But between me doing it that way and looking at the information and collating, saying, "Oh, from one site to the other and here and there," and collating things, um, that's a different experience than my final video,
Mhm.
as opposed to the separate different. So the person that'll watch that will have some sort of experience in watching, but it's not in the context of me exploring it and this and that. But there's still the information there. But the Library of Congress, online,
Yeah.
has so much history. Like, I've been studying the Spanish history that they have in Spain, and they have a huge. Their site is like their government site, equivalent to the Library of Congress, is called Pares. Um, I don't, I don't know why I have to read what, but they have a wealth of information there. It's more difficult for me to navigate that, again, due to the language thing. It's not first nature to me to do so, because I was born here and grew up here, even though I can do it because I have that as a second language. But it's not as easy to tie words together that make sentences, that make paragraphs, and then consume that information in the proper context. It takes more time to do that. But the equivalent of the Library of Congress in English has all these Spanish conquistadors, has all these Civil War uh, people, Spanish people that came, which is my field of interest right now, for obvious
Sure.
reasons. They have them all there, and there's writers in America that have written, and across the world that have written. So if one were so inclined to learn this history beyond the basic teachings of our
Right.
school system, one could arrive at them regardless of whether I do it or not.
Now, see, I disagree
You know,
with you there. I disagree with you there because, for instance, when you first started on this journey, you were going into this blind. You had no idea where to go.
I had no
Now,
idea.
now you know where to go, and you learn more sources as you go along. But the reason you know where to go is because you did that initial search. You started searching for your last name, and you started searching for certain people that you knew within your tree. And then when you got a lead, you started searching for them. And along the way, you picked up more sources. And that's what I'm getting at. Somebody with the same last name as that lieutenant colonel that you posted about earlier, maybe just doing a Google search for that last name. And if your video pops up, by your own admission, right there in the description is a whole bunch of sources. So
Yeah.
I do think what you're doing does have a lot of value. Maybe not for anybody right this very second, but when you first started doing this, I told you, and I think you've discovered that on your own that it is the case. Somebody somewhere down the road is going to be doing exactly the same thing you're doing. They're going to be searching for you, and they're going to be searching for your family for reasons of their own. So the more you can put out there in the genealogical space, the more everybody benefits, because
Yeah.
you don't know where it's going to go from here.
No, we can't foresee the. When I first started this, it was actually Steve that, if you remember, and you were there too, but he said, "Here, Eloy, here's a ancestry tree that I've set up for you with you." He added me. He
Mm-hmm.
put Eloy Escajero, and then he says, "And you can now organize your stuff," because my parents left me and my ancestors left me a lot of um, documentation and uh, photographs and albums, and it was just overwhelming. And it took me 9 years, 6 to 9 years, to me to even be able to sit and look at them, because since my father passed away, my closest last link, um, uh, it took me that long to even be, and still to this day, I look at their pictures and I glance away.
Yeah,
There's
I do
something
the same.
internal inside of me that there's I don't know, it hurts too much to really, but at the same time, yes, it's a very emotional thing for me, because it's everything to
It's part of you.
they're everything to me. Like I in any event, um I started doing that, and then I took that DNA test. But I expected to have Spanish, according to my history, a whole lot of Spanish. And my father always said, and in Spain they were conquered for over 700 years by the Muslims and so on. So I expected definitely to have, um, you know, some form of Arabic, Muslim, or
Middle
whatnot,
Eastern, yeah.
Middle Eastern, let's say. And but that's not what I saw at all.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yet I would have assumed, with my dark features and whatnot, I would have assumed. What did he say? I'm never gonna live down starting him on this mess.
I don't
Well,
think it's. Let me throw something. Let me interject real quick here. I don't think it's a matter of living it down, Steve. You've put him onto a quest, and I mean, he's like, what was the name of that cartoon dog with the deerstalker Sherlock Holmes hat?
Bullwinkle.
Blues Clues or
Oh,
something
oh,
like that with the
Inspector.
magnifying glass,
With the
and
little.
he is just, I mean, hot on the trail, man. I don't think it's a case of living it down. I think you gave him a direction to focus that energy on.
Well,
And
the
you've dug
the
up some pretty wild stuff, man.
oh, yeah, but a lot of it was sitting there waiting for me in my family's records and stuff. But what I want to finish off, when I saw the DNA, and the reason I took the DNA results, you guys were actually there when I
Uh-huh.
opened it up and all that, and I was shocked. You guys were shocked too.
Yeah.
Uh, Um, was because of the what do you call it, the cousins features, where
Mhm.
DNA wise they'll match you with cousins and whatnot. And but the results themselves, like the percentages they give, was shocking as well. Well, not shocking. I was like, oh, okay, but I had to figure, well, why do I have Portugal? Why do I have France? Why do I have Italy? I knew. I said, oh, I know why I have Italy. But why do I have Portugal? Why do I have France? And what's this Irish
Yeah. At
doing
Canary
there?
Islands.
Well, I later found it an option, the Canary Islands,
Mhm. Yeah.
as a source, a possible source.
Mhm.
more likely source. And so all of it was so fascinating, but it took me to Louisiana. It took me, and so that's why I've been studying all this, and I find it fascinating as hell. And it's
Yeah.
American history too, although I'm literally a first
And
generation American.
and that's the important part that a lot of people don't realize. And I'm talking about everybody, in America right now. Well, let's just say everybody in North America, because it doesn't matter if you're American or Canadian. You are part of the history of this continent. You are the descendants from the people who formed Canada and the US. And they had lives, they had stories. And it just wasn't all that important for the average common man to dictate his life, or not dictate his life, but to record his or her life at the time. Some people
Yeah,
did keep diaries, most folks didn't, because it wasn't deemed all that important. So, we now being on a quest to find out what adventures they lived through and what kind of life they led. I mean, I think of it as an adventure, and I've used that word 5 or 6 times already just in this conversation. To
it
them,
is.
that was everyday life.
They had no choice but to live, not sit and like
Well, that's how they
yeah,
existed. I mean, if
right.
you didn't grow it or catch it, you didn't eat, you know? They didn't eat some of the things they ate because they liked it. They ate it because that's what they had, and that's just a part of history. If you're working your way across the Great Plains in a wagon and your wagon broke down and you were too dumb or too lazy to fix it, that's just where you stayed, because
Yeah.
you were choiceless. There was no bus coming along.
Welcome to tumbleweed
Yeah.
somewhere Ohio
Well,
or Iowa or
you don't think people headed out for Tulsa, Oklahoma on purpose, do you? I mean, that's just where they stayed.
yeah.
And if you want further proof of that, think about it. Everywhere you see a nice big ranch here, anywhere in America, you see a nice ranch, nice piece of property with a nice house. What do they got? Two broken wagon wheels out front by the mailbox, because that's where they stayed.
Dry Rock, dry 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 rock, Colorado.
Yeah,
Why is it called? Well, this is where,
yeah.
but the
That was
wagon
the
wheels
only
hit a
rock.
dry rock.
That was the only rock that was dry enough to sit on while we were pondering what our next move was going to be. I mean, I've thought about. I have an ancestor, a cousin. We share a grandmother. I mean, for me, it's like 7 times great or 6 times great grandmother, and he was the head of the cattle column on the Great Migration of 1843 out here into the West from Jefferson, Missouri, out to what later became Portland, Oregon. And several books have been written about him. And he actually wrote a book about his experience on that migration. And I have thought seriously about sitting down with the voice recorder and just reading that book. It's his words. And I mean, it was written in the 1800s, so there is no copyright issue. It is public domain, but it's still being published. I've thought seriously about sitting down and just reading that book and recording it and then putting it up on a YouTube channel
I
and then
love that
putting it on
idea.
the Internet Archive. I just have to find the time to sit down and do it, because it's not a short book.
That would be so cool. You could do it in parts.
I could do it in parts and it would take me a couple of years, but probably to get it all done and get it all edited into one cohesive thing. But you're talking about what would probably be a 10-hour video of just my voice droning on. And so I don't know how well that would go over, but it's a project I've thought seriously about. And I just need to find the time to actually sit down and do it. But whether you're, and I know we've kind of gone in strange directions in this episode, but whether you are into ancestry or not, whether you're into history or not, if you are fortunate enough to have parents living or grandparents living, do yourself a favor, get a hold of some sort of a digital recording device or an old tape recorder or what have you. Turn it on and sit down and just talk, ask questions, learn their story, because somebody, somewhere, someday is going to be looking for you, and they're going to be looking for your parents and your grandparents. And the more you learn about them, the more you learn about their story, the more you learn who you are, and the more you help maybe your grandkids, maybe your great grandkids, maybe your great great grandkids that you will never meet. But it is an important undertaking, is to write down your story and get the story of your relatives around you and put that someplace where it can be found by others when you're gone.
I will. So earlier, I agree with that. Of course, it's so important. I wanted to say that earlier you mentioned, looking back, and you mentioned a few things. Um, Stability throughout the 1800s, which was not that long ago, although it was that long ago. But the idea of stability that we, and this is a mouthful because maybe not all of us have had stability, but in the general sense of American prosperity, what this country has, due to the efforts of the people of the country as individuals working towards their own goals and creating products and creating comforts, creature comforts that we have, and so on and so forth. Let's not assign it to one person, because that's not true. Although we could go back to the founding documents, which laid the groundwork to, um, for us to have some pretty decent amount of prosperity. Even though it's the simplest things, these basic principles of protections that we that that are ours due to the gift that came to us from our creator, or from being humans, if you look at it that way. um, we've not had the amount of prosperity throughout, or I'm sorry, not prosperity, but stability within that, in the 1700s or the 1800s. Maybe some people yes, some people no, but it's always been contentious throughout the centuries.
Mhm.
um, at any given moment, a wrong turn could lead to some sort of catastrophe in the history of the United States and the world. But so even today, that we sit here, and I know we've said it many times, we sit here communicating through a technological advance, such as digital cameras, through a computer, with high definition audio and video, in air conditioned, um,
Luxury.
houses. Yeah, with not 6 to 7 miles away, in some people's cases, or in mine, not even a mile away, access to all sorts of goods.
Hmm.
In the context of of the struggles of the past and stuff, we do have certain amounts of free time, some
Hmm.
more than others, in order to do this sort of thing, and reflect. And those people, many of them did take the time to put pen to paper, and write down for future generations, because that
Yeah,
ancestor of yours, direct ancestor of yours, um, had vision to do what he did.
yeah.
Um, and when you write something like that, you can't. I would be hard pressed that somebody would write something so extended with and eliminate the idea that's so obvious, that they're doing it so that the future can remember them,
Yeah.
and that's a big
Well,
deal.
well, he was a voracious diarist and essayist. He would write about anything and everything. And he was, I mean, there's a lot that happened to him, but there was also a lot that happened here because of him. If it weren't for him, Oregon wouldn't have succeeded as a territory, and it would not have become a state. Um, I can say that with certainty, as many, many, many others, both in his time and today, have said the same thing. That he was instrumental in doing what needed to be done to make that happen. But it's kind of strange in that he was of that mindset to where he wanted to keep records. He wrote letters to, I mean, to everybody he knew, and he kept up with their stories, and he wrote their stories, and he wrote his own story. He did several things. It was, I hate to use the cliche, but it is the case. It was his passion to document as much as humanly possible from his perspective and try to get others to do the same. Because whether he had some kind of a premonition about this being of historical importance or not, he thought it was worthy. And I think that that's something that we've lost that we need to try to get back. We may think our lives are inconsequential, and in many cases they are, you know, but we don't realize who all we have touched. And our story is a snapshot in time right now that our great or great great or great 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 grandkids will never know or understand. So the more we leave for them to find, the more they can kind of understand. That's one of the reasons why I like doing these podcast videos so much, is not so much for any kind of glory or adulation or fame or anything. And it's a good thing, because God knows we're not getting it. But
Yeah.
it's because there is a record. My four times great grandkids can now see what Grandpa Mark thought, what he looked like, what he sounded like, how he acted, the fact that he drank coffee and smoked way too much. And they know my opinions, they know my attitudes. And if the name of this gets them to look up a Led Zeppelin album, it's a success, you know?
Yeah. I mean, we've
So
we've done.
we're going on record. This is us. This is my thoughts. I mean, these are yours, are your thoughts. That's what you looked like. That's what you sounded like. Those were your mannerisms. And now descendants further down the road are going to be going like, wow.
I will say this about that though. About that,
Mhm.
as far, so there is something to be said too. I agree with you on everything, but but just for the sake of levity, there is something to be said. And I've been looking at these old Civil War photos,
Uh-huh.
and there's no video to go with. They're just these old black and white high
Mhm.
def, because they had high def back then
Yeah,
because
they
of
were
the aperture.
choiceless. Yeah, they were so big that yeah, the
It
format
was,
was so big. Yeah.
but fantastic photos,
Hmm.
fantastic photo. Anyways, looking at their photos where they're stoically hand in their vest pocket, staring off to the side, the crinkles and wrinkles on their face, the gloss and the tiredness in their eyes, the weathering in general of their appearance as the war continued. There's something to be said of that snapshot where
Hmm.
you get that
Yeah.
plus the documentation, as
Uh-huh.
opposed to us here scratching our head, turning. Oh, wait a second, I got.
Well, yeah, but it's no less important, because there's a reason why those photos look that way, where the guy is standing there looking off to the side and he's got his hand up here like that. The exposure times for those photos was so long, you had to pick a comfortable position, because you may be sitting there like that for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
You couldn't move around. We have the luxury. We can. I mean, they didn't have shutter speeds of a 2,000th of a second, They had a shutter speed of 5 minutes. So they had to hold that pose.
I'm just saying that there is something good about that,
Oh,
where
yeah.
they get that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a little bit of imagination as to, but if you were to put them in so look, this, I guess what I'm trying to say is that we can be goofy and stuff,
Sure.
and that's recorded forever. Look,
Uh-huh.
this is forever. So that's forever. You're never gonna catch one of these Civil War people going like, oh,
You
you're
don't
never gonna
know that. You
no.
don't know that.
There's no, we don't know. We don't have any evidence of that. However, if you were to bring them into today's technology and you had one of these generals sitting here, he'd be like a normal dude just saying, yeah, because this is that. And if you switched those technologies to then, they would look, they look so stoic, and they look so, there's a sense of, you know what I'm saying, right? Like,
There's a sense of dignity to them.
and
But
and we're kind of like rock and
but
roll,
just
man.
but just to show you that you never know, have you not seen that photo of Albert Einstein making a face at the camera?
That is true.
So we don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
the guy, this may be distasteful for some people, but the guy that you're talking about in that photo may have been telling fart jokes 3 minutes before they got into the photographer's studio.
Oh yeah, no,
So,
100%. Yeah.
so you know, you never, and that brings about another thing, and that's what I'm talking about. They can see my mannerisms, they can see the way I move and the way I sound, and this, that, or the other. Could you imagine Abraham Lincoln with a high, squeaky voice?
No, but he didn't have that that I'm aware of. But yeah.
That we're aware of, but who knows? Because there's nobody alive that's heard him speak, and there are no recordings of it. Now, chances are he didn't, because
Yeah.
somebody would have said something. It would have been documented.
Oh yeah, that would have been an obvious one to document.
But if you look at old footage of George Patton, he had a high, squeaky voice that didn't match his appearance at all. And so you never can tell. His voice was a lot higher pitched than his appearance would have made you believe. You hear
We
him
would,
talk, and it's like, whoa.
on a scale of 1 to 10,
Uh-huh.
following that trend,
Mhm.
how shocked do you think we would all be, all of us here, and all of you out there, 100 years from now or whenever, would we be if they had video evidence of all the great people throughout history, Alexander the Great and stuff? Because we see the marble and the this and
Mhm.
that, but what if it's like the surfer type dude? Hey man, yeah, I'm gonna go and conquer that land over there, like totally, like at least he's not gonna say
Yeah.
that, but I'm saying the appearance of like sort of like a surfer type dude, or because all these people,
Mhm.
which are incredibly important through history, um, were also just like people.
They're just guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, which one of them loved Brussels sprouts? Which one of them hated broccoli? Which one
Which
of them absolutely despised what they're doing and only did it because they had to? That's what I got to do to make money. I'd rather be a lumberjack.
now I
You
will.
know?
I'll take a slight detour and just say this, and I don't know what your impression is. You tell me so that I can reflect, and you guys out there tell me. A little bit of a sensitive subject, but not really. It is, and it's not. Well, it depends on who you are. Whenever I see footage in black and white of Hitler,
Uh-huh.
I don't know where this is coming from. I can't pinpoint, but I look, and there's this immediate aura. And remember, I was born way after, and we
Mhm.
both were born way after. I sense this black cloud of evil emitting from the screen. A sense, I don't see it. I don't see him as a historical figure with no attached. There's an aura that, am I producing that? Obviously I'm producing that in my head. But
Um,
why am I, or not obviously. I don't know if it's
not
obvious or
not
not.
there may be some of that. There may be you may be doing some of that yourself, but a lot of it was done on purpose. Nothing he did, well, I won't say nothing he did. I almost said nothing he did happened by accident, and that's not necessarily the case. For he was a smart person, and he was smart enough to know that he didn't know everything. So he well, not recruited, he basically rounded up the best of the best. His events were lit a certain way on purpose. His oratory style was done in a certain way on purpose. His events were held late at night on purpose. And the whole thing was to make him the center of attention. If you watch the old footage of him coming up to the lectern to speak, he'll stand there and he'll look down at the lectern at his notes, and he'll play with his notes a little bit. He might take a sip of water, and he'll just stand there and he'll kind of fidget a little bit. And what he's waiting for is absolute silence for the crowd, from the crowd. And the longer he waited, the more quiet they got. And then as he spoke, he would start very softly, very quietly, and then gradually increase in intensity and in emotion. And by the end of it, he's screaming and hollering, and the crowd is screaming and hollering. He took them on this huge journey to this emotional crescendo
Mm-hmm.
because he knew how to manipulate. And that's how you do it. You basically, he waited for absolute silence, but he sucked them in.
And and towards what I was asking.
And they filmed him in the same way. And it was all dark behind him. You might see a face here or there. And it also depends on the editing. It depends on who did the edit of the footage that you're watching and what speech it happened to be. But it was done that way for propaganda purposes, to make him appear to be larger than life, almost godlike, and the focus. Anything else that happened to make it into the frame is of no consequence. Focus on this face,
Okay.
because this face is the most important thing in your life right now.
Okay. Let me
And he
reiterate.
was very effective at it. And the people around him, Lenny Riefenstahl and the rest of them, were very effective at it.
Let me reiterate then. What I a different way. Do you get the heebie-jeebies when you look at him, like a cringy or some
Yes,
sort of internal? But
very much so.
but but
I I can tell you from personal experience, when we lived in Germany, we went we made it a point to take our kids to the Dachau concentration camp and various other places of historic importance during World War II. And I can tell you, and I have it on videotape if I can find the tape. I'm still transferring VHS over to digital format. I was carrying the camera and I walked into, I don't remember which building it was. There in Dachau. And it was like a chill went through my entire body all at once. And I said on the tape, you can hear my voice say, "Whoa, did you just feel that?"
holy smokes!
And the um, our daughter went, "What?" And Linda says, "It's cold." And yes, that's exactly right. In my head, and I don't know what he was saying, but one of his speeches started playing where he's slamming his fist and screaming and hollering and everything, and and all that other kind of crap. My mind made that connection. And I still don't remember which building it was. And maybe if Linda's listening, she remembers which building it was in, but it was in Dachau. It happened again when we went to Berchtesgaden, and we went up to the Eagle's Nest, up inside his little private tea
compound.
house, you know. And you go up in this elevator, which is brass and mahogany. I
It's up on
mean,
like some sort of
beautiful.
little mountain, right?
Yeah,
Or
it's up
some
on
sort
a
of.
big stone cliffs. I mean, they drilled into the cliff, made this elevator shaft, and drilled up out of it, and then built a house on top of it out of limestone. And we got up in there, and I stepped out of that elevator into this big hall, and that same feeling came over me. And the association that, holy hell, there are pictures of him standing next to that fireplace. And if you look just right, you can almost imagine his footprints. And it's like, holy hell, what are we doing here?
Yeah, so there's
You
some
know?
sort of like
So what I don't think it's just you. I think that we have been told, rightly so, that he is the embodiment of evil in humanity. And I think that that is absolutely an appropriate response. So I don't think it's just you because it's happened to me.
it's an interesting thing because every time I see, I that's the vibe that I get. Um, yeah,
Okay. She answered, it was the internal jail area where they held prisoners just before execution. That's right. That's right. Because we could have gone all the way through and then out the back door, the exit door. I couldn't. I turned around and I went back out that front door the way we came in, and I went around. And I made a mistake. I came out that door, and as I'm walking out the door, I made a left turn to go around that way. And I made that left turn and went around the corner of the building, and there stood the brick wall where they would line them up and shoot. And I'm like, oh crap. And I U-turn and went around back the other direction around the other side of the building. You know, you don't understand how real that is when you're standing until you're standing right there. I mean, when we were led over to a building and the guy says, look through the window. And we look through these little bitty windows at shower heads in the ceiling. And you know what those are for, and it's not water. It just got real. I mean, very real. So, yeah, our stepson had much the same reaction when he was 7, or my stepson, her son. It You don't understand how real that is and how real it becomes until you're standing right there and somebody is pointing at that and saying, see for yourself. And you're like, holy cow.
insane.
Absolutely insane. 100% insane.
Um, just within that, but slightly moving it um, uh, out into a
Out of the
different direction.
darkness. Yeah.
Um, but still within that, have you guys out there and Mark, have you seen those photos that some sites have where they take a World War II image and they superimpose it with modern people walking in that same area after? Have you seen those? Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I've seen several of them. Um, some of the still photographs, you'll have like a street in Italy, and
Right.
it's modern day. And next to it is another photo of that very same angle, that very same view, with like a platoon of soldiers kind
Uh-huh.
of walking through.
Hmm.
Or sometimes they'll superimpose the two together,
Hmm.
or just a before and after. And I find those things fascinating.
It's just amazing. Yeah, that's why
Yeah.
I brought it up within context of what you were saying. But um, yeah, look, there's if we don't have the ability, well, I can't even say that, but I think that to have this, look, I'm getting chills now.
Mhm.
just appreciation and with a sense of awe to what came before. It's very important to me. It's important to me. I haven't thought it through, but there's big reasons for it that maybe most people would kind of share. Um, that we're here now through the passage of time, like you were saying, and there was all this stuff in the same locations occurring
Mhm.
that could have been from benign to normal buying flowers at the corner shop
Yeah.
to standing at that same spot, a platoon that had lost X amount of people, soldiers, friends, loved ones, in the same place in a matter span of decades, or half a century or whatnot. And there's just something all to me, human beings are, yes, we're super problematic and many of them piss me off on a continuous basis, but the good comes with the bad.
Yeah.
You see how I was going in a nice place, but
Well,
then I remembered there's a bunch of jerks.
day to day life is filled with everything, you know.
Yeah,
Life is a roller coaster. There's ups and downs, and you know that around the next corner there's going to be a jerk. So, you know, but and that's why I think that history, preserving history and recording history, collating and putting it together
is
is
a good
so
thing.
important, so that we can not only keep the good alive, we have to learn from history. So we have to keep the good alive and keep the good things going, and never forget those things. But we also have to learn the bad and never forget those bad things either, because that's the only way we can make sure that we never do them again.
Yeah,
And that, just for a brief second, takes me back to Dachau, because right behind the sign above the gate that said Arbeit macht frei, work makes you free, is another sign in bigger letters in iron that says never again. And they're serious about it, and
mm,
that does give me hope. But we have to know what it is that can never again happen.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
mean, that's why I think all this is important.
Well, I'll end with this bit from the beginning, as well. So when we're, and you've said it roughly within the same context, to take our modern, it's very difficult to not make judgment calls about the past from our vantage point in modern days, because we know what we can and cannot tolerate right now, and we would assume, and rightly so, more than likely rightly so, that it should, from our vantage point, apply throughout across history. Um, because it would, after we've gathered the knowledge that we've arrived at today. But to make judgment calls, missing context, and not taking the time to process context today and make judgment calls about the past is still doable. But understand, if you have any intellectual honesty towards yourself primarily, because who are you kidding but yourself? Because others can find the information and say, no, you're wrong. If you don't investigate those things which you're opposed to, then you have a remedial summary of events that leave a lot out,
Yeah.
and you just might be ready for torches and pitchforks, um, incorrectly,
Yeah.
or maybe torches and pitchforks, if you were to read through, would not be your first thing to reach,
Yeah.
at.
Yeah.
In other words, it's easy to say
And
them bad, them good, like you said earlier.
mhm.
when you don't, and
When
it's not
you
that it's not that it's necessarily a wrong conclusion, but it's
Well, that's the
always a,
hardest thing for us to do as people is admit that there's a possibility that our opinion could be incorrect.
to one
Whether
degree
it be
or the other.
whether it be our fault or through no fault of our own. Because if you're taught the sky is green and that's all you hear all your life, you're going to believe it because you have no reason to doubt it. And if somebody comes along and says, no, it's actually blue, you're not going to believe that. But open your mind a little bit to both sides. Listen, you may learn something, you know? And you're absolutely right. It's real easy to look back in 2020 hindsight and condemn everything. You can condemn everything. And you would probably be justified in condemning most things.
From one's vantage point and with limited
Exactly.
reading into the details of, yeah,
But remember at the same time, you weren't there. You
yeah,
don't know what it was like. You don't know the atmosphere. You don't know the times. You don't know the language. You don't know what's going on. Neither do I. All we
yeah.
can do is learn from one another and try to avoid the big mistakes.
We have limited, unless, I guess this is an equivalency. I'll end it here. If you are confronted with an enemy at the gates at your home, a break-in,
Mm-hmm.
and in that given moment, your reach is to a weapon in order to cancel out the threat to yourself and your family. That moment, that decision, that judgment, your main priority is to survive and whatnot and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If you take that same approach to everything throughout history,
Mm-hmm.
um, that's not imminent, um, I think you're not. If you're ready to pull if you're ready to pull the whip, if you're ready to pull the bat, the club, on everything
At every
without,
perceived slight, yeah.
yeah, you are a dangerous person, in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
because reason is not found in you. And those are the danger people that are
Well,
willing to strike out,
mm-hmm.
um, other than something being of imminent danger to you or loved ones.
Exactly.
Um, you know,
Yeah.
so yeah,
And disagreement does not mean enemy either.
no, no, no,
If I disagree with you, that doesn't mean I'm your enemy. We might agree on more than we disagree on. But, you know, hey, okay, done with that. And
um,
sorry to make it so heavy. I mean, I didn't mean to, but you set something off inside of me
yeah,
that just I had to get through. So maybe
no,
it was a
no,
little cathartic for me too. I don't know.
no, it was good. I'll read this from Les.
Mhm.
But we're taught the opinions of the historians, whether they're right or wrong. Yeah, there are official there. Okay, I'll just say there are. So in the context of the United States, there is a narrative, an official story. In fact, on the Library of Congress's site, which is a spectacular. I mean, my good, you could. By the way, it's just so spectacular. The photographs, everything. They have what you call primary source material that you can. So when you're doing some sort of study on a paper or whatever, you can use this as primary source because that's the official, and this is the primary holder of information, and it's primary source, and you can add it as the primary source. There's also secondary sources and so on and so forth, and all of it combines in order to create the backdrop or the foundations of what you're working at, to have it be in context with evidence and so on. So there's that. But there's an official. But there's always people that say, "Oh, wait, but here's extra material and stuff. And there's always a back and forth um,
Right.
with certain details, and sometimes there's major issues and not. So it's always an ongoing process. Most people, I'm assuming, I think I would be, we have a generalized idea of that um, principal source that we've been taught.
Right.
Um, but it's a generalized thing. And I think people delve, if you're interested in a particular thing, you delve in deeper and you find things that other people are not aware of because it's not part of their daily routine. And so in there, you have extra information
Right.
that can shift, you know. So
Yeah.
a big fail is on the teaching side is to not include substantially the contributions of Spanish Louisiana, which existed for a short while, but it existed during the time of the American Revolution, and those people were called to help the colonies, and they did so.
Mhm.
And even though the Library of Congress has it documented, in your local schools across America, I don't know that
It's
it's.
not
I
taught.
wasn't taught it.
I've
So
never heard that. I never heard that until you brought it to my attention during one of our discussions.
yeah,
And I gotta tell you, I'll be frank, I was cheesed off for 3 days over that because it's like I'm 61 years old. How come I was never taught that? It was never mentioned. And it still fires me up. You did it to me again, damn it. It still fires me up because now I got to know what else did they just fail to mention?
but
There's,
school is very
you know,
right. But isn't school
well, Les
very basic?
Les has a point here that we're taught the opinions of historians, whether they're right or wrong. There's a lot of truth to that. But you mentioned it yourself. The Library of Congress, they themselves list a primary source and then secondary sources. I was taught many, many, many years ago to never believe any one source because every source can have an agenda.
Mhm.
And yes, you're absolutely right, Les. The opinions of the historian, to me, don't matter. There is always more than one source. And if truth matters to you at all, you will always cross reference your sources. You will always check other sources. You know, I don't believe any single source. I might take that and go, okay, interesting idea, and then go do research on my own. You know, I don't do that with everything because a lot of things I'm just simply not interested in. I mean, you can't be interested in everything.
You can't know everything. There's no way. There's no way for us to know. We can know a little bit about this and that,
Yeah, and
and
you
we can.
can't be interested in everything either, you
Well,
know?
there's not enough time to be able.
Yeah.
But that, so that's why these generalizations or these cliff note,
Mhm.
um, you know, sort of like roundabout. This is what happened, are important. But by doing that as well, um, unless you're inclined to study a specific thing for whatever reason, you're
Mhm.
not going to know that you know, Cubans served in
Right.
the both Union, and you're not going to know that. You're not going to know these. And by the way, that's not including the life story. That's my personal journey of discovering things. You're not going to discover how about that German guy or that
Mm.
Hungarian guy that
Yeah.
immigrated in the.
Yeah.
So it's, you know what I'm saying. It's an
Yeah.
impossible.
Well, just a little something like, for instance, most of the redcoats that we fought uh, in the Revolutionary War, most of the British that we fought in the Revolutionary War weren't British. They were Scottish and Irish. Most of them were Scottish and Irish. And that was simply because there were famines running rampant all over the northern parts of the islands, and they had to eat. They
It's,
had to eat. They joined up to be able to live.
and a lot of them just eventually see, and it just. it's an incredible look. The Americas is a wild. It's a wild. If I mean, my goodness, and look, that it's so wild here, or the history has been so wild. You're talking about people like just in what I'm studying about one guy, they ended up in Panama looking to build railroads. I mean, it goes up and down, left and right. It's insanity.
Yeah. Yeah, Steve says what I was taught in California and what Pam was taught in Mississippi are not always the same things. Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of stuff here, a lot of nuance, and it depends on the textbook. I had one history teacher in college that told me if you have a U.S. history textbook that has less than 1,200 pages, it's not worth reading. And I'm like, oh man, this guy's serious. He was. He was serious about his U.S. history. If you have a U.S. history textbook that's less than 1,200 pages, throw it away. It's not worth reading.
I mean, but it's true in the context of this guy that's a studied person
Mhm.
that's focused on it. But the regular person going to the car wash in their soggy old boots,
Yeah.
when they should be chomping on a big
Yeah.
cigar,
Benjamin
um,
who?
for the general public, it's like you've seen the Dave, no, not Dave, what's the guy that Jay Leno,
Uh-huh.
um, you've seen his across the years, his interviews of people and stuff, and they
I've
ask them very basic questions and they can't figure, they have no idea. The American public in general,
I've
maybe it's just out of the ones they pick, but it's like, you can't expect somebody running a grocery store to be thinking about 17th century um,
yeah.
romance
Yeah, if,
novels
if
that
you're
were,
not interested in history, you're just not interested in history. And if you're
yeah,
not interested in geography, you may not give a damn what state is next to South Dakota. You may not know where it is. If you're not interested, you're not interested.
yeah,
But you ask them about something that they are interested in, and they'll rattle off answers like that. You know,
exactly, exactly,
so it's everybody's ignorant to a certain extent, and if you're not
absolutely,
interested in a subject, you're not going to get good at it. So I don't know, I look at those as entertainment, but that's about it. I don't think that any one group of anybody anywhere around the world is dumber or smarter than the other. It's
yeah,
just based on interest. Americans don't know a lot about Europe. Why should we don't live there? By the same token, Europeans don't know much about America. Why should they don't live here, you know?
broadly
So,
speaking, broadly
yeah,
speaking,
broadly speaking, there are exceptions, obviously,
yeah,
because
because there's
some
people,
people are interested.
yeah, there's people that are so into
Hmm.
either European, and in fact, there's
Oh,
some people. I mean, it gets so nuanced. There's some people that are so into Egyptian like history,
oh
and
yeah,
they're from like somewhere in Kansas.
Bug Tussle, Tennessee. Yeah, I agree. But those you're talking about the few. You're not talking about the majority. But but the point remains that they have no reason to have studied the Old West in Bangkok, Thailand. Why would they? Why would they talk about Dodge City, Kansas in Hong Kong public schools? It
Mark,
doesn't make any sense.
Mark, and that's the difference. And I'm not one for people with titles and this and that, but I'm not gonna disparage it either. That's why people that do study these things acquire these vast, historical,
Right.
information or whatever. Um, they have put in the work because that's their interest. So they
Exactly.
they they do have this certain grasp, and even they could be wrong with their conclusions,
Sure.
obviously. And so the most basic thing is the history that we're given, but it's missing a lot of information,
Sure.
and it's on us. It's the onus is on us if we were so inclined to gather. But what I don't like is the persistent ignorance. So if you're talking about a certain thing and somebody brings up information that's it's novel to you completely, and you're like, well, I wasn't taught that. My mom and daddy didn't teach me that. No way. That's it.
Well, yeah.
If
I
you're gonna
mean,
do that, You're just defending. Now you have there's some sort of ego thing going on.
Yeah.
It could be that guy is pulling the wool over your head, which is your first reaction as a person saying that. Well, nobody taught me that. But in for the sake of honor and truth, that wouldn't be the reaction. The reaction should be, I don't think so. Let me check that out, and I'll see what's what.
Yeah.
That's the proper
Well, my
considering
first,
honor. Considering
well,
honor.
considering honor, my first inclination is tell me more. Tell me
Well,
more. What do you mean? I've never heard of this. I mean, that was
well,
my
yeah.
response when you were talking about the people in Louisiana, the Spaniards, Spanish Louisiana, fighting on the side of the colonies. That was my initial response. I didn't give you BS. I never heard that before in my life. I was like, tell me more. What do you
No, you
mean? I've
didn't.
never heard this.
Yeah.
It,
Well, I
it
hadn't
piqued
heard it
my
either.
interest, and I'm like, what? How come we were never taught this? Let's go. That
Well,
kind of.
it was fresh. I gave. I was sharing what I was finding out as I was going because
Yeah,
to
I
me
know, and it intrigued me.
that was brand new to me. I had no idea. But
Mhm.
all right. So
Well, yeah, and the Hessians from Germany as well. Exactly, exactly.
a lot of
So
Germans,
in the Revolutionary War, yeah.
a lot of Germans came here. A lot of Germans.
The man who came to, I'm trying to remember if it was before, during, or after Valley Forge. I want to say it was during Valley Forge. The man who came to Washington's aid and basically helped him whip his troops into shape. And it basically developed the manual for drill and ceremony and the movement of troops from one place to another in an organized manner, which we still call today drill and ceremony. And it's basically when you see troops in formation, marching in step, going from point A to point B. He wrote that manual. Back then, during the Revolutionary War, he was a German. Baron von Steuben was his name. That name has been drilled into my head. So it came from all over the place. It wasn't any one people or nationality or race or anything. It was everybody.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, the history I'm looking at is a complicated history, and so
big
I'm
time.
doing it really more for my sake of learning, but I'm putting it out at the same time in case other people enjoy it. But yeah.
Okay.
All right. So I think we did it. I think we should call it maybe.
We should end it. And I apologize for getting so heavy, but that was also cathartic for me to get it out of my system when you brought that up. But
We never touched on the
it was,
subject because I just wanted to touch on it a little bit, but we went off into the whole
well,
thing.
that's what we do here on the Trampled Underfoot podcast.
And I'm still working on it, so it's like, well, anyways, let's land the plane.
Okay.
We do want to thank you guys for hanging out. We hope you enjoyed it. We always talk about different things, and we go where the wind takes us, and we chat about it. But you guys would know that because you're hanging with us here. So nothing. We go live every Tuesday at 9:30 Eastern, 6:30 Pacific Coast time on the Trampled Underfoot podcast channel on YouTube. We have a website called trampledunderfootpodcast.com. You can catch our past episodes on the with the Wayback Machine button that we have over there, and we have a site over on our Facebook page as well. So we wish you well, and we're also sponsored by
Harneo Media. You see him over here putting up links to our various websites and our Facebook page and what have you. That's Steve Nealon. He's the man, the myth, the legend. If you are looking about getting a web presence, you want to develop a website, but you don't know where to go, you don't know what to do, you're just thinking about it. Steve is the man to talk to over at Harneo Media. He can set you straight. He can do as much or as little as you want. If you want the full meal deal where he builds up the website and runs it for you, he can do that. Or if you already know how to run a website, you just need a place to park it, he can help you with that too. And it's personalized service. You're not dealing with some nameless, faceless entity. It's our friend Steve over there at Harneal Media who's going to take care of you. So check him out online at harnealmedia.com. That's HARNEAL media.com. He's the sponsor of trampledunderfootpodcast.com.
All right. All right, guys. Enjoy the rest of your week. We're out of here. Be safe. See ya.
Peace.